our thank you, Nishant. Nishant has started our recording. I spoke recently with Jacob Goldman, who has a long and distinguished career. He's the chief engineer and vice president of Energy Tax Advisors Energy Tax Savers, and has a wealth of experience not only in working with the energy industry, but also in the changes in the energy industry and what's going on with specifically tax codes. He has presented, he's done a lot of publishing and then also presenting at AEE West, AEE East, and most recently last week at AEE World. So he's coming fresh off of that, coming to present to our chapter. We're very excited about this. And so Jacob, I'll go ahead and stop sharing if you want to go ahead and take it over and lead us into your wonderful presentation this evening. Uh-oh. Are we getting it? Yes, we are. Perfect. Take it away. Uh-oh, Jacob, I know you had tested your audio earlier. Are we still good? Me? Yes, now we can. Okay. Perfect. Go ahead.
Okay, somehow I was muted without me doing it, but so thank you. I did just present at AE World, and now I improved that presentation, and you even get a better presentation than the AE World presentation. This should be good. I'm sure you're all very excited to talk about tax at 4:30 at night or in the afternoon, and so we'll dive right into it. There we go. So we're going to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and how it enhanced a whole bunch of alternative energy credits. We're going to talk about 5-year MACRS and bonus depreciation, time value of money, a tax incentive near and dear to my heart called 179D. We're going to talk about what I call traditional 179D, which was the 179D that's been around since 2006. And then we'll also describe how the Inflation Reduction Act has enhanced 179D. And then we'll talk about apprenticeship, and you'll see why we're going to talk about apprenticeship in the presentation. If anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to put it in the chat, and somebody will read that off to me, and I'll answer the questions as we go along.
Thank you. I was just going to make that logistical announcement too. Perfect.
So there's many different alternative energy items that get a tax credit. I've just listed a couple of them. The reason I put some in bold is because those incentives can get both a tax credit and 179D. They can qualify you for both. It's 2 for 1. The other incentives, the other ones that aren't bold, you can only get the credit. There is no way to utilize it for 179D. But the ones in bold, ground source heat pump, CHP, and thermal energy storage, those can actually help you qualify for both the alternative energy credits and the 179D that we're going to talk about later. So probably the first thing you'll notice on the top of the slide is a little question mark next to 2022. The reason I put that question mark there is it appears, and just so you're aware, what happens is a law comes out and then IRS creates guidelines and notices and regulations, and that'll come out over the next several years, those items. Right this second, all we have is the law. For a law that comes out in August, it is extremely rare that that law relates backwards to the current tax year, 2022. Oftentimes when a law comes out, it only relates to the future, meaning starting January 1, 2023. But it appears, and until IRS says something differently, it appears that all of these change credits are available for your projects that are placed in service in 2022. So I personally am hesitant, and that's why I put a question mark. I'd feel a lot safer, but here's what's going to happen. If you do one of these type projects, you only file it on your tax returns come next spring. And so by that point, IRS will have the forms that you need to fill out, and it will become abundantly evident whether these credits are available for 2022 or only for placed in service in 2023. But every indication right this second is that in fact, unusual to tax laws that come out in August, that these all go into effect in 2022. So it's unusual. I'm a little hesitant about it. That's why I put the question mark. And we'll find out for sure when the forms come out for filing, and you'll know sometime by January whether the question mark is warranted or not warranted. So a lot of people think that the credit went up. That's not 100% true. What is true is the credit actually went down to what they call a base credit. So those credits that used to be 30 or dropped down to 26, they're all now 6%. And in the case of microturbines, poor microturbines, they only get a 2% credit. But there's a whole bunch of bonuses, and we're going to talk about those bonuses. There's what I call the 5-time bonus. So 5 times 6 brings up to 30%. There's the bonus I'll call Made in the USA bonus. There's an energy community bonus, which I sometimes call the mansion bonus. And you'll see why. And then for solar and wind, there's the low income bonus. And so what that means is for solar, and this just boggles the imagination. If you put a solar project in the exact right place in the United States, that solar project could potentially qualify for a 70% tax credit. 70% tax credit. You pay 30%, and the federal government will pay 70% if you put that solar project in the exact right place in the United States. So incredible opportunity if you put your solar in the right place. Ground source heat pumps, they used to have a 10% credit, and now they could get bonuses all the way up to a 50% credit. So really good for you that are doing ground source heat pump projects. Thermal storage, where they're making ice at night and using the ice to cool your building in the day. Thermal storage had a 0% credit before this came out, and now they can get up to a 50% credit for a thermal storage. So if you were able to sell thermal storage projects with a 0% credit, imagine how easy it is to sell when you have a 50% credit. So some really exciting stuff has happened with the Inflation Reduction Act, and I look forward to talking to you about them. So let's talk about the 5-time bonus first. So there's 3 ways to qualify for the 5-time bonus. They're or, it's not an and, it's an or. So any of these 3 ways allows you to qualify for the 5-time bonus. So the first one is projects with a net output of less than 1 megawatt. So 1 megawatt is pretty big for solar, but that's the number they use. So if your project is less than 1 megawatt, then it gets the 5-time bonus. So 6% times 5 equals 30%. Now, megawatt is not really a common measurement for HVAC equipment. So for like ground source heat pump. So we did some math, and we think that 1 megawatt is equivalent to 284 tons of cooling. And so if your project, your ground source heat pump project, is less than 284 tons of cooling, you also can qualify for that 5-time bonus. Now, for thermal storage, for example, it's not really measured in tons. So I don't know exactly how it's going to be. Maybe it's the tonnage of the chillers that feed the thermal storage. We're not really sure how that's going to work, but the tonnage of the chillers feeding the thermal storage might be a good way to go with the 284 tons. Things like CHP obviously come in megawatts or kilowatts. And so that's a direct comparison. If you're
Jacob,
not, go ahead.
One quick question. When you're saying project, is that defined as a specific customer, all of their sites together, or does each site consist of a separate project if they have multiple facilities?
So I believe, and once again, all we have is the law. We don't have the rest of the rule set. So We'll go on to the other two ways to qualify for the 5-time bonus, but it is my belief, and I wanted to underline belief, that a project is at a certain location, and to the extent from a vendor standpoint that you can sell these as individual projects at individual locations, you'll be better off if you have difficulty meeting the other two ways to qualify for the bonus. There is a possibility that IRS's translation will be that, if you're doing things at 20 different locations and it's all with the same vendor, that IRS might consider that one single project. And if that's the case, then you got to meet these other two methods instead of the first. But it is my belief that a project is at a single location.
Okay, thank you.
And unfortunately, you're going to get a lot of that from me tonight, in that all we have is a law. We don't have all the interpretation of the law. And unfortunately, that's going to come out over months, if not years. 179D, which has been around since 2005, there were some guidelines that came out in 2008, guidelines that you needed to understand things better, that didn't come out until 2008. Now, you're allowed to, as long as you don't have guidelines, you're allowed to make conservative interpretations of what you do have. But they clarified things a little less than 3 years later. So that could happen here as well. I hope it doesn't. I hope it happens a lot faster, but it is quite possible that we might not get specificity, in which case you act with the best understanding that you can have. So the other way you can get the 5-time bonus, and once again, this isn't or, is by meeting the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. Now, once again, of course, we don't know what those requirements are, but you can imagine that this section of the law was probably developed by lobbyists related to unions. And so if you have union labor doing your installs, more than likely you're going to qualify meeting these prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. Prevailing wage is pretty straightforward. Every jurisdiction, the Department of Labor has defined what the prevailing wage in that jurisdiction is. The apprenticeship is a little more complicated. They do have to be from a registered apprenticeship program, and ultimately they have to be 15% of your workforce on an hour basis. You will have to have apprentices installing these projects. So that's the second way. The last way to qualify is until the date that these prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements come out, plus a 60-day buffer period. If you've started construction of the alternative energy project, and it's not the project, it's not like the building, it's the actual alternative energy portion of the project. If you start that construction before those guidelines come out, or plus 60 days, then you too get the 5-time bonus. So any project, that alternative energy project that started today, and is being placed in service in 2023 would definitely qualify for that 5-time bonus. So your projects right now that are, installing solar, they will qualify for the 5-time bonus. So the next bonus is called the domestic content bonus. The domestic content bonus requires that at least 40% of the cost of steel, iron, or manufactured product is produced in the USA. And I'm hoping what the rules will come out is that manufacturers of solar panels and ground source heat pumps and the like will be able to just get a certificate, and you'll be comfortable that yes, it meets the domestic content bonus. So that bonus is a 2% bonus. But if you meet the 5-time bonus, then the 2% is also multiplied by 5. So if you don't meet the 5-time bonus, it's 6 plus 2 equals 8%. If you do meet the 5-time bonus, it's 30 plus 10 equals 40%. Now, Water Furnace is a popular ground source heat pump company, and CalMac is a popular, thermal storage company. Those are both produced mainly in the United States, as far as I know. So if you're doing a CalMac or a water furnace project, you're already at the 40% level. For the thermal storage, you used to have a 0% credit. Now you have a 40% credit. for ground source heat pump, you used to have a 10% credit. Now you have a 40% credit. So tremendous opportunities for those ground source heat pump and those thermal storage projects because the credits have gotten so high for them. So the next bonus is called the Energy Community Bonus. I'm not going to go over each one of these 5 different ways that you can qualify as an energy community, brownfield site. But I will point out these bottom 2, and the reason that I call it the Joe Manchin bonus. So if your project is in a census tract or in an adjoining census tract to where a coal mine was closed since 2000, then you get this bonus. So if you put your solar panels, for example, in a location that in that census tract a coal mine was closed, or in the adjacent census tract a coal mine was closed, then your solar panels get another 10% bonus. Places like West Virginia and Kentucky will probably have a lot of coal mines that were closed, and so lots of portions of those states will likely qualify for this additional bonus credit. Now, to expand beyond that, though, is also coal-fired plants. So coal-fired plants have not been limited to places like Kentucky and West Virginia. They've been all over the country. And so if a coal-fired plant was closed in a census tract or adjoining census tract since 2010, it's a slightly different year. And I think I saw on the Sierra Club's website that there might be close to 200 coal-fired plants that were closed since 2010. So there's lots of places in the country where a coal-fired plant was closed. If you do your ground source heat pump project in that census tract or an adjoining census tract, you get this bonus as well. So once again, officially it's a 2% bonus, but if you meet the 5-time bonus requirement, then it goes up to a 10% bonus. So 30% bonus for 5 times if you meet the 5-time, 10% available for the energy community, plus another 10% if you meet the domestic production. You're now at that maximum 50% credit for ground source heat pump, CHP, thermal storage. So tremendous increase in credits if you place your projects in the right place. And then for solar and wind, and only for solar and wind, there's an additional bonus, and that's called the low income bonus. And so if you're in what's called the low income community or on Indian land, you get a 10% bonus for projects in 2023 and 2024. Or if you're in what's called a qualified low income residential building or qualified low income economic benefit project, you get a 20% bonus. So this is why for solar, it doesn't just stop at 50%. It goes all the way up to 70% as a potential. So if you put your project near a closed coal mine and it's for low income residential buildings and it has made in the USA and you qualify for the 5-time bonus, that project will get that solar project will get a 70% credit, which is just unheard of, a 70% credit for that project.
So Jacob, there are a couple of questions here in the chat.
Sure.
So I can just read them out. First one is, a solar project 5 times bonus qualifies for access across all types of facilities, for example, municipal, school districts, commercial and industrial, assuming that prevailing wage is used.
So I'm going to put a pin in that question because it's on the next slide.
Okay, great. So then let me capture these other ones here quickly. If this is a tax credit, then the governing interpretation of who is the taxable entity, and is that going to be likely how it gets defined as the quote project is the taxable entity?
So the entity is the party pulling money out of their pocket and paying for the project. So
okay.
Whoever's the economic owner of the equipment is the economic owner of this tax credit. And to the extent they're hinting at the question the first question you asked, I'll answer that on the next slide.
Okay. And just 2 quick ones. Do residential rooftop solar projects qualify for these bonuses?
So my presentation today is only about, commercial type projects. I'm not an expert on the residential. The Inflation Reduction Act does have a whole bunch of stuff for
residential, but I'm just not an expert in them. The only
Okay.
residential we do get into is like co-ops, condos, and apartment buildings, where it's, a multi-family type situation. So it is a kind of a commercial entity.
Okay, and then one last question quickly for the ground source heat pumps. Would it likely be that if you got the maximum rebate, that it would pay for the cost of the thermal wells, leaving the cost of only the above ground equipment remaining to finance as part of the project?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not an expert on
Okay.
what the split is on costs of ground source heat pump projects, but it is, and I'm picking on water furnace just because I know where they're located and that they manufacture in the United States. But a 40% credit does go a long way in paying for portions of projects. Whether that equals the cost of the boreholes, I don't know the answer to that. Maybe somebody on the chat could just, somebody experienced with ground source heat pump would be able to estimate how much drilling is required and the cost of that for the boreholes, off the cuff, but I wouldn't be able to do that.
Okay, excellent. And that clears everything out of the chat. So please feel free to move on.
Okay, so this is the craziest slide of the whole Inflation Reduction Act, and it was hinted to by the person that asked the first question. This just blows my mind that this is going to be allowed. I hope everybody has bought a whole bunch of solar panels and put them in a warehouse someplace, because it's going to be hard to get solar panels, I think, in the upcoming year. So there's something called Section 6418. If you are a commercial client, meaning a taxpayer, but as you know, some taxpayers don't have tax capacity. And so they can't really benefit from a tax credit. And so what 6418 does, it allows a taxpayer to sell their tax credit to another taxpayer. So this is not available. This 6418 is not available for governments or anything like that. It's only available for taxpayer to taxpayer. But if you can't benefit, and there's lots of different building types that just the way they fill out their taxes, they don't have tax capacity to benefit from a tax credit, they will be able to directly sell it. Now, we've seen these markets for low-income housing, you can sell your credits. From some states have film credits where you can sell. What I would tell you is those credits typically sell somewhere between 70 cents and 95 cents on the dollar. So you'll be able to put, if you don't have tax capacity, you could sell your credits, and at minimum, you probably could get 70 cents on the dollar of the credit and put that money directly into your pocket. So those parties that were, for the longest time, were unable to benefit from the credits from installing solar probably didn't install their solar. And here's an opportunity now where they're going to be able to sell their tax credits to somebody who can take advantage of them. And that can help justify the project. Now, this only takes in effect January 1, 2023. So it is not for 2022 projects. It is only taking effect starting January 1, 2023. And here's the kicker of all kickers is Section 6417, which also takes effect in January 1, 2023 for projects placed in service January 1, 2023. And we're not exactly sure how it's going to work, but it sounds like it's just going to be filling out some tax forms. And so companies that are exempt from tax, like not-for-profits, like Stanford University, for example, for Harvard, for all sorts of different not-for-profit hospitals, they're going to be able to get the tax credit directly. So I don't know if any of you have tried to help these companies put in alternative energy, and you created all these convoluted LLCs with tax partners and other partners and selling the energy back to the building and things like that. You don't have to do any of that. These entities, these like Stanford, will be able to directly get the tax credit. There'll be a payment directly to them in the amount that we just talked about, that 6%, the 30%, the 40%, the 50%, all the way up to the 70%. they will directly, so picture all those K through 12 schools that have put off putting solar panels on the roof. Those K through 12 schools can now directly benefit from this tax credit, because not only is it for not-for-profits, but it's also for state and local governments. So anything state or below, it also is available, and it's available for Indian tribal, it's available for Alaska Native. So all those type of entities can now directly get this tax credit. We're not sure exactly how it's going to work, but it's going to be something like filling out some tax forms, and they're going to get a check from the federal government. Now, the federal government is not eligible. It's kind of like moving deck chairs on the Titanic. You don't want to move money from IRS, from Treasury over to, you know, GSA, for example, or US Army. So there's no federal benefit here, but if you're state or local, they will directly be able to get these tax credit. So I hope that answers the question that the first person asked before, but it's an incredible piece of legislation, opening up the opportunities for all sorts of new parties to directly take advantage of these new tax credits. It's just incredible. So I bring this slide back up so you can see what it looks like. Microturbines is the only one that only starts at a 2% base credit, but all the rest are 6%. And that can build based on that 5-time bonus, the Made in USA, the energy community, the low income, you know, many different ground source heat pumps can get 50% credits, CHP 50, thermal energy storage 50. There's a tremendous benefit when you can get half off, you know, it's like a half off sale on your alternative energy projects. And I remind you that all the ones in bold, not only do they qualify for the alternative energy credits, but they also help qualify for 179D, the tax deduction. So I did add a couple slides here. I'm going to go through them. I'll probably skip a couple of them, but I'll focus in on ground source heat pumps. The base credit is a 6% credit. What typically qualifies is the bore field and the heat pumps, and that's the installed cost for both of those things. Downstream from the heat pump, though, you can take property downstream from the heat pump, but it has to, there's kind of what I call a tax interpretation. So there's no actual rules. This is an interpretation off of other rules that exist. And based on that interpretation, and I give you the section where that is. And by the way, that section has nothing to do with ground source heat pump. It has to do with other equipment. If 75% of the energy used by that downstream equipment is coming from the ground source heat pump, then that property also qualifies for the credit. So that could be pipes, ductworks, heat exchangers, diffusers. So if your ground source heat pump is covering the 80–90% of the load of the building, meaning heating and cooling load, then that property that's downstream, that property that's delivering the cooling and the heating, like that ductwork and diffusers, that property also qualifies for this credit. Now, any items that doesn't use the ground source for its energy, let's say you have a backup boiler, for example, a backup furnace, those items don't qualify for credit at all. And ground source heat pumps, unlike a lot of the other ones where they only have legislation out for 2 more years, ground source heat pumps got it all the way out to construction beginning before 1/1/35. So the lobbying group for ground source heat pumps did a great job and got legislation all the way out to 1/1/35 for their equipment. So tremendous opportunity for ground source heat pump. Thermal storage. So there's some rules. What is thermal storage? And this is where it's a little confusing, and we might need some guidance here. First of all, it says that it needs to be directly connected to a heating, ventilation, or air conditioning system. So this is kind of interesting, because does that mean you get to take the chillers that cool the ice plant or not? And so this might indicate that the property is separate from the HVAC system, and so maybe you can only take the tanks and the installed cost of the tanks. Now, the second bullet, which is an and, goes in the opposite direction. It says
the property comprising a system that removes heat from or adds heat to a storage medium for subsequent use. So this might indicate that chillers feeding a thermal storage tank are eligible. So maybe the chiller and the tank is eligible. And the last one provides energy for heating or cooling of the interior of a residential or commercial building. So this is not for heating or cooling of things other than buildings. So if you're heating or cooling something other than a building, that doesn't qualify. So it has to be a building. It might include the chillers, it might not. And we're gonna have to watch and see how IRS rules on some of these things. It definitely excludes swimming pools, CHP, and buildings or structural components. And this, the construction has to start by 1/1/25, but I wouldn't worry too much about that date. The reason being, oftentimes right near the end of the year, they extend these things, and they'll extend it a year, they'll extend it 2 years. So I wouldn't necessarily worry that this is going to disappear for projects after 1/1/25, but there's a possibility for it. And so, oh, by the way, my email address is on every one of these slides. If you want a copy of the slides, don't hesitate to shoot me an email. Just say, please send me the slides from your presentation tonight, and I'd be glad to send you a copy of these slides. At jacob.goldman@energytaxsavers.com. So if you do want a copy of the slides, don't hesitate to shoot me an email. CHP, it has to do 20% of its energy in the form of thermal. It has to do 20% of its energy in the form of electrical or mechanical. The energy efficiency of the CHP has to exceed 60%. Once again, it's that 1/1/25. If you're putting in a really big CHP, 15 megawatts or more, the credit starts dwindling because there's a ratio of your project's megawatts to, 15 megawatts to your project side. That's a multiplier. So if your project is 30 megawatts, you cut your credit in half for those projects. And then any project above 50 megawatts, it doesn't qualify at all. And the interesting part here is it does not include any property used to transport the energy to the facility or distribute the energy produced by the facility. So it really comes down to the boiler, the turbine, the generator, and maybe the heat exchanger, if there is a heat exchanger directly connected. It's the installed cost of those elements, but not anything that's bringing the natural gas to the facility or the electricity or steam away from the facility. So that design of that property and the cost of that property does not qualify for CHP. I'm going to skip over the microturbine and microgrid controllers, but if you call for the slide, if you send me an email for the slides, they'll be in there. It's really just language directly from the legislation. And once again, we don't know what's going to actually happen with regulations. So this is the only knowledge that we have at this point. Anybody have any questions on alternative energy, because we are starting our shift away from alternative energy? Anybody post anything, Heather?
I'm not seeing much else in there. Was one question regarding the tax credit 6418. This was Mirazun who specifically asked, the 17 cents back, is that per kilowatt hour or how is it calculated? I don't know if that was back on a previous slide.
17,
okay.
I don't know what.
Okay, so maybe.
Yeah, it might be mixing up some of this 0.17%. That's a way to qualify for the energy community bonus. It's a crazy, like I have no idea how this works, but you have to show that 0.17% of direct employment came from coal or oil or natural gas, and that same area had higher than average unemployment. That area then becomes eligible for energy community bonus. I am praying that IRS just issues a list. Here's the areas that qualify for energy community bonus, because I have no way of knowing how to calculate whether an area has 0.17% direct employment from coal, oil, or natural gas.
Right, and we've had a lot of luck with having the maps come out either from the CPUC or from other state entities here, giving us those areas, those qualifiers. So hopefully the federal government will follow suit. Other than that, we've had a couple of chatter back and forth on questions, which kind of got answered in the chat. So I think we're pretty much cleared to move into the next section. If there are further questions on these, please feel free, either put them in the chat or you can connect with Jacob directly afterwards. I'll go ahead and drop his email address into the chat if anybody wants to go ahead and copy it for their own use. But let's move on.
So all those alternative energy properties that I just talked about, you know, CHP, solar, wind, all of them, all of those qualify for what's called energy property. And when you're energy property, you get to depreciate your asset by 5-year MACRS, which is an accelerated way to depreciate an asset. So for example, if you put a chiller in a building, that's 39-year property. But if you put ground source heat pump in a building, it's 5-year property. 39-year property is a very slow way to depreciate. 1/39th a year for 39 years. MACRS is an accelerated way to depreciate, where you even get to depreciate more up front and a slower tail on the back. And you'll see that on the next slide. The other cool part about alternative energy, if your property is alternative energy property, you might think that you have to reduce the basis of that property for depreciation purposes by the amount of the credit. That's not true. You only have to reduce it by half the amount of the credit. So there's half of the credit that you get to depreciate again. It's like double dipping. You get a double dip, a second bite of the apple, and you get to depreciate something that you already got a tax credit for, or half of what you got a tax credit for. The other amazing part is that anything that's 20-year MACRS or below is automatically available right now in 2022 for 100% bonus depreciation, which means you can expense the project immediately. And then starting in 2023, it drops down to 80% bonus, and then the year later 60, and the year later 40, and the year later 20, and then theoretically it would go away. Now, Congress could pass a law that changes all this, but right this second in 2022, it's 100% bonus, and it's scheduled to be 80% bonus in 2023. So any property that's 20 years or smaller, which energy property is, you get to depreciate at a much faster rate. So what does that mean? So I took an example of a $39,000 project and used a 35% tax rate. And so if you were to depreciate that $1,000 a year, and that's why I made it 39, if you depreciate it $1,000 a year for 39 years, the value of that in today's dollars using a 4% discount rate is $6,854. But I traditionally use the 4% discount rate, but our current inflation rate is at 8%. So I'm throwing in an 8% discount rate, and you'll see that cuts the value of that stream of dollars down to $4,158. So the real value of depreciating $39,000 over 39 years is only worth somewhere between $4,000 and maybe $7,000 in today's dollars. It's that time value of money. I'd rather have $1 today than $1 in the future. So that being said, if you can move things to 5 years, you don't put in a chiller, but instead put in ground source heat pump, that value over 5-year depreciation is worth $12,252 using a 4% discount rate. So that's $12,000 versus $6,800. It's not a doubling, but it's almost a doubling in value by moving something from 39 years to 5 years. And then if you get bonus or 179D, which you'll find out shortly is another form of accelerated depreciation, you get to expense the project in year 1. And so that value is $13,650. $13,650 is 3 times better than 8% discount for 39 years, and double the value of 4% discount rate. So it's tremendously valuable to be able to move property to a faster depreciation schedule. And the reason we put this slide here is A, because alternative energy projects qualify for the 5% 5-year MACRS, and B, 179D moves things to an immediate deduction up to $1 amount. So this is our transition slide to go from the alternative energy world to now 179D tax deductions for putting energy efficient equipment in buildings. So this is a completely different tax incentive. It is unrelated to the ones that we've already talked about, and it's been around since 2006. So as I mentioned, it accelerates depreciation. Typically, equipment in this category is depreciated over 39 years. EPAC 179D allows for an immediate tax deduction. You get to write it off immediately up to $1 limit. It's that time value of money concept. It is available for commercial building owners. They can take this, and commercial building owners, and only commercial building owners, they can go back and do these projects, get a 179D deduction for their projects all the way back to 1/1/2006. So any of you that have done energy efficiency projects on commercial buildings, taxpayers' buildings, they can still go back and get this tax deduction if they forgot to. They can get it right now. And what we're doing here is layering the cake. 179D is not the cake. The cake is the energy savings. I would say the frosting is usually utility rebates. 179D is like the cherry on top. It's the smallest of the three typically. So first you want to get the energy savings, then you want to get the rebates, the utility rebates, and then 179D comes in and gives you the cherry on top. We've done 16,000 buildings throughout the country, nationwide, helping building owners, and you'll see shortly designers of certain types of buildings get this 179D tax deduction. As I mentioned, commercial building owners, taxpayers can go back and get this deduction all the way back to 2006 for projects that they didn't take, and they don't have to amend their tax return. They can put it on an upcoming tax return. And this IRS notice 2011-14 is the rule set that allows you to go back all the way to 2006 and still capture this tax deduction for those energy efficient projects that were previously installed. This is not available for designers of tax exempt projects. This is only available for those tax paying entities that put in energy efficiency. Designers of tax exempt projects, they can only go back 3 years. That's the amendment window for those projects. So how did 179D change because of the Inflation Reduction Act? The first big change is 2022 and earlier, the designer could get the benefit only for their designs of government buildings. That is now extended to not-for-profits, to instrumentalities, and to Indian tribal governments. So those projects now, the only party that can take this deduction on government, not-for-profit, instrumentalities, and Indian tribal, what we call non-taxable entities, all those non-taxable entities, the only party that can take the deduction is the designer. And that change takes effect 1/1/2023. So it's for projects placed in service after January 1, 2023. The deduction has a new deduction amount. So if you meet the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, it's the same requirements as before, but it doesn't have a 1 megawatt small size option here. You have to meet the prevailing wage to get this larger deduction amount, but that larger deduction amount now ranges from $2.50 to $5 per square foot if you meet those prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements on the labor installing the energy efficient project. If you don't, the deduction actually drops. So right now you could get 60 cents, $1.20, $1.80. It actually went up due to inflation all the way up to $1.88 in 2022. But if you don't meet it, it now is going to drop to 50 cents to $1. So if you don't meet the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements on a project, your deductions just drop to 50 cents to $1 for your projects placed in service in 2023. The overall building efficiency, this has changed a little bit. The way you qualify, it's based off of overall building energy efficiency. It is not based on individual lighting, HVAC, and envelope like in 2022. Starting in 2023, it's overall building energy efficiency. And you have to show a 25% improvement to get the low end of the deduction and a 50% improvement to get the high end of the deduction. There's no more, starting in 2023, there's no more lighting, HVAC, and envelope. It's only for the entire building. There are now 2 different ways that you can qualify. So one way is through the traditional energy simulation modeling, where you model your building versus standard. If your building is 25% better than the standard, it qualifies for the minimum deduction. If it's 50% better, it qualifies for the maximum. Anywhere in between, it qualifies in between. The other way is only available for retrofits. and that uses EUI, energy use intensity. If you show a 25% reduction in EUI for the 12 months before a project compared to the 12 months after, that project qualifies for the low end of the tax deduction. If you get it up to the 50% drop in EUI, then you qualify for the high end of the tax deduction. There is now a reset. So the deduction used to be once $1.88. Once you got the full $1.88 for a building, there was no more deduction available for the lifetime of that building. Now, commercial projects can reset every 3 years, and tax exempt projects can reset every 4 years. So that means that as long as you didn't take a deduction in 2019, you can take a deduction in 2023 for a tax exempt project. I always keep forgetting I need to change this slide, and instead of government, it has to say tax exempt. I'll remember hopefully after this presentation. So what does that look like from a deduction standpoint? 100,000 square foot building, you could qualify for a $250,000 deduction, all the way up to a $500,000 deduction. If you're a designer of a tax exempt building, how much did you pay for that project? Well, designers don't pay for projects. The government or the not-for-profit pay for the project. So that designer gets this full tax deduction, this $500,000 tax deduction, just by designing energy efficiently. So we have some clients, using the old rules that have, paid zero income taxes in 2006. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all the way out to today, they have paid no income taxes because all they do is design energy efficient K through 12 public schools. They've wiped out their tax liabilities every year since 2006. They paid no taxes just by designing energy efficiently. So this is a tremendous benefit for the designers of tax exempt projects. What do we mean by tax exempt? So on the government side, it's federal offices, military bases, courthouses, post offices, labs. On the state side, state offices, transportation. We do a lot of state university work. K through 12 public schools in the local area. That's probably the biggest. Not for profits. There's private universities. There's churches. There's hospitals. Tribal. It's not just about casinos. There's lots of tribal governments that own, shopping malls, shopping plazas, office buildings. There's a lot of buildings owned by tribal government, and the designers of those projects get the tax deduction. Gets this tax deduction. They can qualify for that. $500,000 tax deduction for that 100,000 square foot, middle school, just by designing energy efficiently. And if they do it with ground source heat pump or thermal storage or something like that, the school can get that credit and the designer can get this deduction. Tremendously valuable for the designers of tax exempt projects. You need two things to qualify to monetize this incentive. You need a project. So it has to be in the lighting, HVAC, or envelope realm. It needs to be somewhere between 2006 and the present. And then you need to beat an energy efficiency standard. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky. So if your project was placed in service between 2006 and 2015, you have to beat ASHRAE 2001. If your project was placed in service between 2016 and today, I can tell you definitively it's 2007. But IRS has the rule set in hand from the law on how to change the ASHRAE standard. And the rule set says the ASHRAE standard should be ASHRAE 2016. But until IRS affirms it, where they have to actually say, yes, the ASHRAE standard is 2016, then the ASHRAE standard still remains ASHRAE 2007. So as of today, they have not affirmed the new standard, but if they were to follow the rule set would put it at ASHRAE 2016. And so sometime between now and, maybe at the beginning of the year, maybe they're going to wait a couple of years, I don't know. But once it goes to 2016, it's going to get a lot harder to qualify for this tax deduction because 2007, the lighting was all based off of fluorescent, and 2016, the lighting is all based off of LED. It is going to be a lot harder to qualify. What I tell you is there's a few technologies that still qualify against 2016, and you'll see some of those on the next chart, and they're bolded. There's also the new way, which is the retrofit EUI method, where if you can show that pre-project EUI was one thing and your new EUI after the project is a 25 or to 50% drop, then that project also qualifies for the tax deduction. So here's a bunch of technologies that we have tended to find qualify for this incentive. You'll notice that geothermal, thermal storage, combined heat and power, those projects tend to qualify for both, and we think they'll continue to qualify for both, even if the ASHRAE standard changes. You know, they just really help the cost structure and hitting that 25% improvement level, especially when we're meeting 100% of the load or close to 100% of the load on projects. So where's 179, where does it work best? It works best for designers of tax exempt buildings. It works for new construction, commercial new construction. And then for retrofits, it turns out in the retrofit world, there's a lot of other ways to accelerate the depreciation of something. So if it's a not-for-profit, if it's a tax-exempt retrofit, then the designer gets the benefit. It's fine there. But for commercial retrofits, there's other ways to accelerate your depreciation of equipment. So what you typically want is a new project and an old roof or envelope project since 2006 that's sitting on the tax depreciation schedule. You can qualify the building with the new project and apply the deduction against that old roof or envelope project that's just sitting on the tax depreciation schedule being depreciated over 39 years. What kind of data is needed? Well, we need to do energy simulation modeling. So to energy simulate and model a building, you typically want, ideally, architectural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, comm checks, lighting and HVAC spec sheets. That's the ideal. That's really easy to get for new construction. For retrofits, though, we're looking for all the drawings that you can get, even old drawings. And then we're going to want like lighting surveys, project square foot information, HVAC unit schedules, any sort of mechanical plans. You know, anything that can get our hands on that would help us do energy simulation modeling. We do complimentary reviews. We do the calculations. We stand behind it. We do audit defense. So that's where a 179D service provider. When you're doing these projects, you're going to be looking for a service provider. You're going to want them to do all these different things as it relates to your project. 179D update comparison. So pre-2023, the maximum deduction was $1.88. Now it's $5. You could qualify off of individual systems. Now it's a whole building technique. Designers could only qualify for government projects. Now they can also qualify for nonprofits and tribal governments. You could almost only take the deduction once during the whole lifetime of the building. Now you can take it a reset of every 3 years for commercial and every 4 years, and this should say tax exempt, every 4 years. You used to have to only beat ASHRAE 90.1 2007. Now the standard is going to be updated. We don't know exactly when, or you can do the EUI method for the prior state. Any questions on 179D? I just have one more slide after this that's related to both incentives. Do you have any questions? Okay. So the last slide is the apprenticeship requirement. So it is relevant to both 179D and the alternative energy items. So if your project started before 1/1/23, you're going to want 10% apprentice based off of total labor hours. For 2023 start dates, you're going to want 12.5. And after 2023, you're going to want 15%. If a project has 4 or more workers, at least one of them is required to be an apprentice. And the apprentice must be part of a registered apprenticeship program. And I give you the code defining what a registered apprenticeship program is. Also, this is a link. You can get the link to that information. Our company is experts on 179D. We also have other services specifically related to the R&D tax credit. we're a mix of, people on the tax side. I'm an engineer by background. I'm also a lead AP. So we have most of our company is engineers, but we do have attorneys and CPAs at our company. And mostly what we do is speak at conferences and write articles. So that's how we go to market. We don't have a sales force or anything like that. We're subject matter experts. If you want copies of the slides, if you have any questions, I'll stick around for additional questions. But if you want copies of slides, don't hesitate to shoot me a copy, an email to jacob.goldman@energytaxsavers.com, and I'd be glad to send you a copy of these slides. Glad to answer any questions offline as well, but I'd be willing to stick around and answer questions now as well.
We do have a couple right here in the chat. Is the IRA or 179D subject to sunsetting in the future? Or are they going to be replaced potentially by a future administration?
So 179D is permanent tax legislation, but there's no such thing as permanent tax legislation. It just says that it doesn't have an expiration date, 179D, but at some future date, just a couple of years ago, the tax laws changed and they got rid of a whole bunch of tax. Like, I don't know if you follow like the SALT tax, that was permanent legislation. And then it was just changed. So they made a change. And so at any future date, they can change any of this. Right now, for some of the IRA stuff that I talked about, it's for projects where construction begins before 1/1/2025. And for ground source heat pump, it's projects that begin before 1/1/2035. Now, that being said, it is likely when we get close to 1/1/2025, they're going to extend the legislation. That's what they've done, year in and year out for many, many years. And so it is quite possible they're going to do that again. And so, it's called a tax extender. You'll probably hear about tax extenders come in December. They're going to be talking about it again. There's certain legislation unrelated to the stuff we're talking about, but there's certain legislation out there that they're going to be trying to extend, come December. It's always done in what they call the lame duck session, which is the session after an election, but before people take office. So it's the old Congress that some of them are going to be replaced, and they pass things then in the lame duck session. So a lot of times that's when tax extenders get passed. So it does sunset, but we think it'll just get extended. But it is possible for a new administration, if they get the votes in Congress, to change all this.
Sure. So the last question that I see in the actually there's two. How can an energy services company doing efficiency and solar installations in K-12 and muni spaces benefit from this?
Yes.
And I think, yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So one way is you could benefit your clients by helping them get the alternative energy credits. So your K through 12 clients will directly be able to get the energy credits. And then from your standpoint, you can get the 179D tax deduction directly. Your company can get a deduction for designing energy efficiently. Some of our biggest clients are ESCOs. So they're wiping out millions of dollars of tax by taking this tax deduction for designing energy efficiently.
So I think that also answers the second question that was posted, which was projects that qualify under California Government Code 4217 and tax exempt facilities. Would they also qualify for 179D? And it sounds like yes, although the the tax credit becomes the installer's credit and not the end user's creddet, correct?
Yeah, so it's not a credit, it's a tax deduction.
Oh, tax deduction, okay.
And it's not necessarily the installer, it has to be someone designing, someone selecting the technical specs. So it is for the designer of those projects. But yes, the designer of those projects can get the 179D tax deduction. But those, if you're putting in alternative energy, those entities can get the alternative energy credits directly. So there's kind of two sides to this. On the alternative energy side, those entities can get those credits directly. On the 179D side, the only party that can get it is the designer.
Great. So Another question that came in, do you have any comments or experience on tax exemptions for microgrid projects?
So I don't know if you're talking about sales tax. There is some slides here. I did have a slide for the microgrid controller. There is a tax credit now for microgrid controllers, for the install of microgrid controllers. And that microgrid controller incentive can go to the not-for-profit or the government entity that's buying the microgrid controller. I'm not an expert on microgrid controllers, but it's equipment that's capable of generating not less than 4 kilowatts and not more than 20 megawatts. And it can't be part of the actual electric grid, is what this bulk power system is. It's got to be a microgrid, not
Right.
part of the actual grid.
Something that's islanded and not necessarily part of the in California it would be the Cal ISO grid, or the
Right.
in other areas it would be different. Okay, for ESCO projects, can we go back to 2006 for those credits deductions on past projects?
If it's for government projects on 179D, you can only go back 3 years, which is your amendment window. Anything older than 3 years. So right now that means 2019. So you can get a deduction for your 2019 projects, your 2020 projects, and your 2021 projects. You cannot go back further than 2019 for designer benefit on government projects.
Excellent. All right, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ask anyone who would like can go ahead and unmute and ask any last questions you might have as we hit the waning moments of our session today. Anybody else?
If I could, I'm sorry if I missed it, but I'm curious on a different front about multifamily and how the IRA may help encourage electrification, energy efficiency, resiliency in the multifamily space. And apologies if I missed that.
Yes, so multifamily, like apartment buildings, is a commercial building owner. Obviously, if they do any sort of alternative energy project, they can get the alternative energy credits. And if they're not for profit, if they're like a condo or a co-op or something like that, though there is that 6418 or potentially 6417, depending on if they're listed as a certain type of tax entity or not. Either one of those could allow them to either sell their credits if they can't use them, or if they're a not-for-profit, they can directly get the credit using 6417. So that's for on the alternative energy side. On the 179D side, the deduction goes to the designer, and so of the not-for-profits. And so if there's a situation where it's a not-for-profit and it qualifies for 179D, the multifamily has to be 3 stories or above. So it's actually 4 stories and above, sorry. 4 stories and above. If it's 4 stories above and it's commercial, that commercial building owner can get it. If it's not for profit, then the designer can get it.
Got it. Okay. And are there any multipliers yet identified for opportunity zones, disadvantaged communities, HUD facilities?
So the only bonuses that have been identified is the low income housing bonuses. Let's see if and these are not super defined, but one thing is called the low income community or Indian land. That's a 10% bonus for 2023 and 2024 projects. And then there's something called the qualified low income residential building and a qualified low income economic benefit project. Those get a 20% bonus. These ones down here.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Yes, I have one. Jacob. So for government agencies, school districts, colleges, before, if we did like a solar project, we didn't get the federal tax incentives, the ESCO or the power purchase agreement company they could take advantage of that. So I think what I'm hearing today is that the colleges can now, I guess that's what the 6417, they could get that tax incentive or to get that tax benefit, or is it different? Is there a
No,
different?
So it's slightly different. What you'd have to do in those situations, you'd have to change. So what's happening in the current state, what you're talking about, is you have a power purchase agreement, you have the ESCO owning the equipment, and so the ESCO gets the credit and then sells the school energy. You would need to turn that on its head, and the school district would own the equipment. If the school district owns the equipment, then the school district can directly get the tax credit. We're not exactly sure how the mechanism is going to work, but we feel it's going to just be filing some papers, and they'll get a check from the federal government. But it would have to be the school district now owns the solar, not an ESCO using a power purchase agreement.
And the percent went up. Interesting. Okay, so I'll have to take a look at that, or if we could keep the same model but mandate that we get that increased benefit from the power purchase agreement folks. That way we're not dealing with maintenance and all the rest
so
of the.
If you like that, where the ESCO is taking care of the equipment, there's benefits to that, obviously. But you just want to see what they qualify for. Is it a 26% credit, or are they buying you made in the USA panels, which would allow you to get a 40% credit? Are you located in one of those energy communities that allow you to get a 50% credit? So you'd want to monitor that.
Yeah, and I'll have to do the numbers again, because now that all the utilities have changed their time of use, it makes it difficult to pencil out anyway for solar projects or microgrid projects. So yeah, new math.
Another question came in on the chat. How much on average does it cost to go after these type of credits? I assume that means the 179D, if you're claiming it as the designer, or for the IRA related credits as someone who provides that service to companies like this.
Yeah, so our company and our competitors, we all charge a mere fraction of the value of the incentive. Our typical fee is, somewhere in the, I think it was like somebody told me, depending on how many measures we have to model for, we're somewhere, I think they said was between the 2 cents and 6 cents a square foot range, depending on what type of facility is an office. Like a warehouse is easier to model than an office,
Yes.
For example. So 2 to 6 cents a square foot, I think is what somebody quoted me as our fee.
Okay, excellent. All right, any other questions? You are free to unmute yourself and ask if you'd like.
Yeah, this is Dan Mendoza, just jumping on what Nat was asking about for governments who might want to take advantage of that credit. When would projects have to, based on when do they start or when they end, what are the dates for that?
Yeah, you get the credit the year it's placed in service. So that's the year you get the credit.
And what's the earliest that's in service?
1/1/2023 is the early. You don't want, if you're in the middle of a project right now and you have a choice of finishing it in December or finishing it in January, I would try to finish it in January.
Okay. That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Play the tax calendar a little bit, right? All right. Well, thank you all for your robust participation on the chat. Jacob, thank you so much for bringing your expertise. I know that as is always with new legislation, the devil's going to be in the details as the regulatory agencies get their fingers into it and as we all figure out how to apply this stuff. So I definitely think it might be in our best interest to have you back in about 6 months to see what has changed. But anyways, in the meantime, thank you everybody for attending today. If you do want Jacob's email address, I did drop it in the chat. Otherwise, please feel free to reach back out to our contact at AEE NorCal email address. We can also provide it to you that way. We will also send out the link to the recording of the event today. But ultimately, that's it for us today. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you on some of our future meetings, or even